My daughter-in-law's hand closed around my wrist so fast I nearly dropped my coffee cup. We were standing in my son's brand new sunroom, 20 people laughing around us, and she leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume and said, "Walter, we need to leave." Right now. I asked her why, right there with half the neighborhood still filing in through the front door, and she didn't answer me. She just kept her fingers locked around my wrist and started pulling me toward the coat closet like the house was on fire. It wasn't until we were sitting in her car at the end of the block, doors locked, engine ticking as it cooled, that she finally turned in her seat and asked me a question I still hear some nights when I can't sleep. "Walter, did you actually read what you signed for Marcus back in the spring?" My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 35 years building a small chain of hardware stores across 3 counties in central Pennsylvania. Starting with one cramped storefront my father helped me lease when I was 29. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago, breast cancer, and since then, my daughter-in-law Renee has been the closest thing I have to family who checks on me the way Carol used to. She's married to my nephew Danny, my late brother's boy, and after Carol died, Renee started showing up every other Sunday with a casserole and an excuse to sit in my kitchen for an hour. I never had a daughter of my own. Somewhere along the way, without either of us saying it out loud, Renee became one. The party that day wasn't for Danny, though. It was for my son, Marcus, and his new house. Marcus is 31, my only child, and until that Saturday in April, I believed I had exactly one job left as a father, which was to watch him build a life and stay close enough to help if he ever needed it. He'd worked in my stores since he was 14, stocking shelves on weekends, learning the register, then the ordering system, then eventually the whole business side once he finished his degree in supply chain management at Penn State. I never made him love the business. I always told him he could walk away and do something else entirely if he wanted. But he loved it the way I did. The satisfaction of a well-run store. The relationships with contractors who'd been coming in twice a week for 20 years. 18 months earlier, Marcus had come to me with a plan to open a fourth location. This one in a growing town about 40 minutes east, where a new outlet mall was pulling in traffic. He had a partner lined up, a man named Preston Cole he'd met through his fiance's family, someone who supposedly had experience in commercial real estate development. I gave Marcus $175,000 from money Carol and I had set aside over 3 decades. Money I'd always thought of as the last gift I'd give him, whenever the right moment came. I told him to be smart with it. I told him I trusted him completely. He hugged me in my driveway and said he wouldn't let me down, and I believed him, because that's what you do when you've raised a good son. I never asked to see the paperwork on that new store. Not once. I signed whatever Marcus put in front of me and let him run the numbers, because questioning him felt like an insult to everything I'd taught him. Looking back now, I understand that my trust wasn't a strength anyone admired. It was a door I'd left standing wide open. The house Marcus bought was on a quiet cul-de-sac in a development called Hartwell Ridge, about 30 minutes from my place, full of new construction colonials with 3-car garages and freshly sodded lawns, still bright green from the sprinkler systems. I put on the gray button-down, Carol always said made me look respectable, grabbed the gift I'd picked out, a set of engraved hand tools with his initials on the handles, the same kind of thing my own father had given me when I opened my first store, and drove out with Renee, since Danny had a work trip and couldn't make it. Renee drove. I remember she was quiet most of the way, scrolling through something on her phone at red lights, and I didn't think much of it. She's always a little reserved before family gatherings, gathering herself the way some people do before walking into a room full of noise. We turned onto Marcus's street a little after 1 in the afternoon. I saw the house number on my phone. Then I saw the actual house, and something in my stomach tightened for just a second before the pride pushed it back down. It was bigger than I expected. A lot bigger. Inside, the place looked like something out of a home renovation magazine. Quartz countertops, recessed lighting in every room, a finished basement with a wet bar that hadn't even existed as a concept when I bought my first house. There was a caterer setting out trays of little appetizers on the kitchen island, and a bartender working near the sliding doors to the backyard, where I could see a hot tub already installed, steam curling off the water even though the house had closed less than 2 months earlier. I stood there, holding my gift bag of engraved tools, feeling strangely small in a room full of people celebrating my own son. Marcus came over and hugged me, told me how glad he was I'd made it, and introduced me again to his fiance's parents, Preston and Diane Cole. Preston, it turned out, was the same Preston who'd partnered with Marcus on the new store. and he had the kind of firm handshake and expensive watch that made a point of itself. He looked at my button-down shirt and my gift bag and said, "Walter, good to see you again," in a tone that was polite on the surface and something else underneath. His wife Diane asked if I still worked the floor at my stores myself or if I had people for that these days. I told her I still liked getting my hands on the inventory. She smiled, the kind of smile people give, something they find a little quaint. The afternoon rolled on, and I started noticing small things I couldn't quite name yet. Marcus kept drifting toward Preston and a cluster of men near the hot tub, talking low about numbers, about something called a second position note and a buyout window. Every time I wandered over to join them, the conversation shifted. Someone laughed a beat too fast, and Marcus would clap me on the shoulder and ask if I wanted another drink. Renee noticed it too. She's always been sharper than me about people, about the small shifts in a room that I miss completely. She leaned close to me near the dessert table at one point and said quietly, "Does Marcus seem off to you today?" I told her he was probably just nervous, hosting his first big party as a homeowner, trying to impress his future in-laws. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Marcus's fiancée, a woman named Kayla, was polished and warm on the surface, hugging every guest, giving tours of the kitchen, laughing loudly at her father's jokes. But every time she looked at Marcus, there was something underneath the smile, something quick and measuring, like a person checking the time during a conversation they wanted to end. I told myself I was imagining it. Fathers get protective, I thought. This is just what success looks like for his generation. Different from how I built things, but not wrong. Around 3:30, Renee excused herself to find a bathroom. The one downstairs had a line of guests waiting, so she headed for the staircase, saying she'd try one upstairs. I watched her go, still holding my drink, still telling myself everything in that beautiful house was exactly what it appeared to be. I had no idea that the next 15 minutes would end the version of my life I thought I was living. Renee told me later that the upstairs hallway was quiet compared to the noise below. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've wandered into a different house entirely. She passed two closed doors before finding what she guessed was the primary bedroom. A large room with a bed made up in sheets that still had their fold lines pressed into the fabric, and a bathroom attached with a soaking tub straight out of a showroom display. She used the bathroom, washed her hands, and on her way back through the bedroom, her eyes landed on the dresser near the window. There was a stack of papers sitting there, the kind of stack people leave out when they're in the middle of something, not yet filed away. She said she almost didn't stop. She said, some small voice told her, to keep walking, go back down to the party, but something about how those papers were left out, still slightly curled from being handled recently, made her pause. The top page was a closing disclosure from a title company. Renee isn't in finance, but running a household budget for 8 years taught her how to read a bottom line. The purchase price on that page was $980,000. She stood there reading it twice, because that number didn't match anything Marcus had ever told the family. He'd said the house was a stretch, but manageable, well within what the new store's early numbers could support. Her first thought wasn't suspicion, it was confusion. Where had that kind of money actually come from? She almost set the papers back down and walked away right then. She's told me since that some nights she wishes she had. But underneath that closing disclosure was a second folder, and on the tab, written in black marker, were the words Hayes Hardware Restructure. Renee opened that folder, standing alone in my son's bedroom, and what she found inside made her sit down slowly on the edge of the bed. There were printed emails between Marcus and an attorney at Preston Cole's firm. There was a document titled Membership Interest Assignment Agreement with my name typed across the top, and clipped to the front of it was a photocopy of a limited power of attorney form dated the previous October, with my signature at the bottom. She said she recognized my handwriting instantly, that crooked capital W I've signed with my whole life. But she also knew, the same way I would know a few hours later, that I had never signed anything called a power of attorney in my life. Not that I remembered. Renee sat there with that folder open in her lap, her heart going, trying to make sense of language she'd never had reason to learn. Words like fiduciary authority and controlling member interest, words that don't belong anywhere near a family, words that belong in a courtroom. She was about to close the folder and put it back exactly where she found it, when she heard voices from the walk-in closet just off the bedroom. A door she hadn't noticed was cracked open a few inches. She recognized Marcus's voice first, tight and low, and then Kayla's, sharper, more certain. Renee froze on that bed, the folder still open across her knees, and did something she had never done before in her life. She sat perfectly still and listened to her cousin's fiancé through a cracked door. What Renee heard, she repeated to me almost word for word a few hours later, because she said even as it was happening, she knew she'd need to remember every sentence. Kayla's voice came first, calm, businesslike, the voice of someone who'd already made peace with something uncomfortable. Once your dad signs the amended operating agreement next month, my dad's firm closes out the transfer completely. After that, we don't need him involved in any of the store decisions at all. Marcus's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it, even filtered through a wall. I don't know, Kay. This feels like a lot. He trusts me completely. Kayla's answer came fast and flat. He trusts you because you've never given him a reason not to. That's exactly why this works. My dad structured it clean. The buy-sell language in that liability document covers the transfer of controlling interest. He thinks he's protecting the business in case anything happens to him. He has no idea what he actually signed in your kitchen that day. There was a pause, and then Marcus said something Renee has told me she will never forget. And once I've got controlling interest across all 4 stores? Kayla answered without hesitating. Then we sell the 4th location's debt position to the group my dad's already lined up, cash out the equipment loans, and you run the whole thing exactly how you want, without him second-guessing every order you place. Renee sat frozen on that bed, the folder still open across her knees, listening to her cousin's fiancé discuss selling off 35 years of my life like a line item on a spreadsheet. She said something cold moved through her chest, not fear exactly. More like the floor of the world had quietly dropped an inch beneath her without warning. She closed the folder gently, set it back on the dresser exactly as she'd found it, and walked out of that room on legs that barely felt like her own. I was standing near the hot tub talking to one of Marcus's old high school friends when I felt Renee's hand close around my wrist. I turned and saw her face, and even now I couldn't fully describe what I saw there. She wasn't crying. She wasn't visibly panicked in any way another guest might notice. But her eyes had a stillness I'd only seen once before, the week Carol was in hospice. The look of someone holding something enormous, perfectly steady so it wouldn't spill. She leaned close to my ear over the music and said, "We need to leave. Right now." I asked her why, right there with a drink still in my hand and Marcus's friend still mid-sentence beside me. She didn't answer. She just tightened her grip and started walking toward the coat closet, pulling me gently but firmly along, the way you'd guide someone away from something dangerous without wanting to alarm them. I said her name once, quietly confused, but she just shook her head slightly, a small motion that told me to wait, to trust her, to not ask again where anyone could hear. We found Marcus near the front door, and Renee told him, in a voice so steady I still don't know how she managed it, that I wasn't feeling well and needed to get home. Marcus's face flickered with something, concern maybe, or something closer to alarm, and he asked if everything was okay, a little too quickly, a little too carefully. Kayla appeared at his side within seconds, her smile fixed in place, saying how sorry she was I had to leave early, hoping I felt better soon. Renee thanked her warmly, hugged Marcus goodbye, and steered me out the front door, past the row of cars along the curb, into the cool April air. We walked to Renee's car in near silence. I climbed into the passenger seat, and she got in beside me, staring straight ahead through the windshield for a moment before starting the engine. She pulled away from the curb without a word, and I watched in the side mirror as the big new house shrank behind us. Marcus and Kayla still standing on the front step watching us go. We drove about 10 minutes before she pulled into the parking lot of a closed bank branch and put the car in park, like something told her we weren't going anywhere else until this conversation happened. She turned in her seat to face me fully for the first time since we'd left, her hands folded tight in her lap. I remember thinking, right before she spoke, that I had never seen Renee look quite so afraid of saying something out loud. "Walter," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." I told her, of course, whatever it was. She took a breath and asked me if I'd actually read the paperwork Marcus brought to my kitchen back in October. The liability form he'd said the business insurance carrier required after Carol passed, something about protecting the stores if anything ever happened to me too. She asked if I'd really read it, or if I'd just trusted him and signed it. I sat there in that empty bank parking lot, and something in my stomach dropped before she'd even finished the question, because I already knew the answer. Marcus had come by my house on a Sunday afternoon, that fall with a folder from what he called the insurance company's legal partner, told me it was routine, something about updating the liability coverage across all 3 stores, now that I was the sole owner without Carol as co-signer anymore. I remembered signing it in maybe 90 seconds at my kitchen table, barely glancing past the first page, because my son handed it to me and told me it was nothing to worry about. I told Renee slowly that, no, I hadn't really read it. I'd trusted him. She closed her eyes for a second, like she'd been hoping I'd say something different. Then she told me everything. The closing disclosure with the real price of the house, the folder with my company's name on the tab, the power of attorney document with my signature that I apparently never understood I was signing, and then, as close to word for word as she could manage, what she'd heard through that closet door. Kayla's voice explaining how the transfer worked, how I had no idea what I'd actually signed. Marcus's voice asking what happened after he had controlling interest, and Kayla answering that they'd sell off the fourth store's debt position to a group her father had already arranged. I sat completely still in the passenger seat, my hands resting in my lap, even though there was nothing to hold on to. For a long moment, I couldn't say a single word. 35 years of my life, and my own son had been quietly signing pieces of it away to strangers, while I stood in his backyard holding a drink and feeling proud of him. Renee drove me home, mostly in silence after that. I don't remember much of the actual drive, just the blur of familiar roads while my mind replayed that October afternoon over and over. Marcus at my kitchen table, folder in hand, telling me it was routine. Me signing without reading because that's what you do for your son, because that's what trust is supposed to look like after you've spent your whole life building it. That night, after Renee had gone home and checked on me twice by phone, I sat alone in my den with the desk lamp on and pulled the small fireproof box where I kept anything that mattered: tax returns, the deed to the house, Carol's old insurance papers I'd never had the heart to throw away. I dug through it until I found the thin manila folder from October, the one Marcus had dropped off. I hadn't even filed it properly. I'd tossed it in there and forgotten about it, the way you forget things you never thought would matter. I read through that folder at nearly midnight, pages I should have read 6 months earlier. The language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't fully follow. Phrases like durable power of attorney and controlling member interest. Buried on page 5, in a paragraph that looked almost identical to the surrounding insurance language around it, was a clause granting the attorney, in fact, my son, the authority to execute the transfer of ownership interest in Hayes Hardware under certain triggering conditions. I read that paragraph a dozen times. My hands weren't shaking from anger yet that night. They were shaking from something closer to disbelief, the feeling of realizing a door you thought was locked had been standing wide open the entire time. I sat there until nearly 2 in the morning, staring at my own signature at the bottom of a page that had quietly handed away 35 years of my life, wondering what else I'd trusted without ever really looking. The next morning I called Harold Pruitt, the attorney who'd handled every piece of paperwork for my business since I opened the first store, a man who'd known me longer than Carol had. I told him I needed to see him right away, that it couldn't wait, and something in my voice must have told him this wasn't about a lease renewal. I sat across from him a little before 9 that morning and slid the October folder across his desk. He read through it slowly, his face going flatter with every page, the way a man's face changes when he realizes an old friend is in real trouble. When he reached page 5, he stopped, read it twice, and looked up over his glasses. "Walter," he said, "this isn't a standard insurance rider. This is a durable power of attorney with specific business transfer authority buried inside it. Whoever drafted this wrote it to look routine on purpose. This is not something a good faith law firm writes by accident." I asked him what that meant for me, today, right now. He told me plainly that under this document, Marcus currently had the legal standing to begin transferring controlling interest in my stores, and depending on how far things had already progressed, we might be racing against a clock we hadn't even known was ticking. Harold picked up his phone right there and called the county recorder's office while I sat in that chair, feeling 35 years of my life narrow down to the next few hours. He confirmed nothing had been formally recorded yet, which meant we still had time, but not much of it. Harold and I spent that entire day working quietly, because the last thing either of us wanted was for Marcus or Preston Cole's firm to sense anything was wrong before we were ready. We drafted a formal revocation of the power of attorney and filed it with the county that same afternoon, along with a notarized statement confirming I had never knowingly granted authority to transfer ownership of my business. Harold also called my longtime accountant, a woman named Sylvia, who'd handled my books for almost 20 years, and had her freeze any pending transfers connected to the store accounts. I called Renee from Harold's office and told her what we were doing, and she was quiet for a moment before she said something I've thought about many times since. "Walter, I'm not sorry I went upstairs. I know maybe I shouldn't have looked, but I'd rather you be angry at me for looking than lose everything Carol and you built together, because I walked past it." I told her there was nothing to be sorry for at all, She'd saved something I didn't even know was in danger. By the end of that day, the power of attorney was formally revoked, the accounts were secured, and Harold had a paper trail showing exactly when I'd filed to protect myself the moment we discovered the truth. We agreed I wouldn't call Marcus that night, not out of spite, but because I needed to be calm before I spoke to my own son about something this serious. And calm wasn't something I could fake yet. I sat on my back deck that evening long after dark, looking out at the yard where Marcus used to shoot baskets with me as a boy, trying to understand how a person grows from that kid into someone who sits in a closet discussing selling off his father's life's work like it was furniture. I didn't have an answer that night. I just knew I needed to face him with the truth instead of my temper. I called Marcus 2 days later and asked him to meet me at the original store, not at his new house, not at mine, somewhere that belonged fully to me. I think some part of him already sensed something was wrong, because his voice on the phone was tighter than usual, careful in a way it hadn't been before that party. He came alone, without Kayla, which told me something too. He arrived a little after 10 in the morning, and I had the October folder along with Harold's paperwork sitting on the counter before he even walked through the door. I didn't raise my voice. I told him calmly that Renee had seen the closing disclosure on his dresser and had overheard him and Kayla through the closet door. I watched the color drain slowly from his face while I spoke. He tried to explain, his voice cracking, saying it wasn't supposed to happen the way it sounded, that he never actually wanted to push me out completely, that it was just how Preston's firm structured things for tax purposes. I told him plainly that I'd already spoken with Harold, that the power of attorney had been revoked and recorded, and that I knew exactly what that document allowed him to do, regardless of how he wanted to explain the intention behind it now. He didn't argue after that. He just sat there at the counter where he used to do his homework as a kid working the register, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. Word travels fast in families, even the parts nobody wants to travel. Within a week, Preston Cole called me directly, his voice noticeably less polished than it had been at the party. He said he wanted to clarify a few things, that his firm had simply followed instructions given to them, that any misunderstanding was purely a matter of communication. I told him plainly that a durable power of attorney buried inside insurance language wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a strategy, and that I'd already forwarded copies of everything to the State Bar Association for review. He got very quiet after that. Marcus came to see me alone about 2 weeks later, sitting across from me at my kitchen table where he used to do his homework as a boy. He looked smaller somehow, tired, the confidence from the party completely gone. He admitted that Kayla and her father had pushed the plan forward faster than he'd been comfortable with, that he'd let himself get pulled along because he wanted to prove he could build something as impressive as what her family already had. He said he was ashamed, and for the first time since that afternoon at the party, I believed him. I told Marcus that trust isn't something you get back by explaining yourself once at a kitchen table. I told him the stores stayed fully mine. No shares, no transfers, no discussions about the future of the business until he'd spent real time earning back what he'd spent 31 years building and then handed away in a single signature. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't argue or try to explain his way around it. He just accepted it. I never went back to that house on Hartwell Ridge. Marcus told me a few months later that he and Kayla had called off the engagement, that things had come apart under the weight of everything that summer, though he never gave me the full details, and I never asked. It's been almost a year now since that party, and the stores are still mine, fully, cleanly, with every piece of paperwork checked twice by Harold before I sign anything at all. Marcus still works with me, back on the floor in a manner of speaking, rebuilding trust, one ordinary day at a time instead of one big gesture. He shows up early. He asks questions instead of assuming. And slowly, carefully, I've started letting him back into small decisions again. The way you test weight on a bridge you're not sure can hold you anymore. Renee and I talk about that day often, usually on Sunday afternoons when she comes by with something she's made for dinner. She still says she isn't sure she should have looked at those papers on the dresser, but I tell her every time that her looking is the only reason I still own what Carol and I spent our whole lives building. She saved something that afternoon neither of us fully understood was already slipping away. What stays with me most isn't the anger, though there was plenty of that for a while. It's the lesson underneath all of it, simple enough that I probably should have known it already at 64 years old. Trust and love are not the same thing as blindness. You can love your son completely and still read every page before you sign it. You can believe in your family and still ask questions when something feels off. I gave Marcus 35 years of trust without ever asking him to earn the second half of it. And that gap is exactly where someone else found room to walk in. We still have Sunday dinners together, quieter than they used to be, more careful, but real. Marcus is rebuilding something with me slowly, the right way this time, and Renee still squeezes my hand sometimes at the table, the same hand she grabbed that afternoon in his kitchen. And I squeeze it back every time, grateful in a way words don't fully cover. For the niece who became my daughter, who noticed what I couldn't, and had the courage to pull me out the door before it was too late.